All right. Just to give you fair warning, I haven't even gotten funny yet, but thank you for laughing. Um, this is typically the cycle each and every year that we do these review sessions. The first few start off really solid. People show up. They have good conversations about the worksheet. They start to dust off the brains a little bit and see what's there. And somewhere between session 3 and 6, and it varies from year to year, typically with the crowd, somewhere between session 3 and 6, what starts to happen is you guys show up, and now it's like chill time until 8:10 or 8:15, until like, oh, now he's going to talk. Okay, now we'll pay attention. And again, I just want to reinforce with you guys, some of the 10 best minutes of this review session, in terms of how you will actually learn, are going to come from you actually doing this work at the beginning. So I understand the temptation to come in and just kind of ease your way into the morning. Like, you got here about 8, you're proud of yourself, and now you're going to take 5 or 10 minutes to kind of warm up, drink your Starbucks that you convinced your parents to go buy you before you got here. And then like 8:10, 8:15, when we start talking, you're like, okay, now I'm going to get into this, now I'm going to get something good. Those first 10 minutes are really valuable for you because that's when your brain is most engaged. Once I start talking at you for the next half hour, the same thing is going to happen that typically happens in class when either I or Miss Bird or Miss J start talking at you. Like, you're good for 5 or 10 minutes, and unless we're having a really good day and we're funny, which doesn't happen often, at least in my class, like then the eyes start to glaze over a little bit, and the drool starts to slide down the corner of the mouth, and you're totally out of it. So if that's all that's happening for the morning review sessions, you're not going to get much. But if you can engage yourself from the beginning and begin to pull out the knowledge that you already think you have and talk to the people around you that are also very, very smart and start to compare notes, those conversations are going to last far longer in your brain than listening to me talk to you for 25 minutes. So please take advantage of the beginning part of the review session because it really is helpful. We're not just trying to kill time, I promise you. At least not most days. Okay, so with Japan, what do we want to focus on? Yeah, we can definitely do that. Okay, what else? Okay, government and politics. What else? Economy. Culture. Treatment of women. People of significance. All right. So pretty much all the major topics as usual, right? Okay. Is there any area of Japanese history that we feel fairly confident on already? The arts? Or the one that you're just the least worried about? Okay. All right, so let's start with government then. We'll just kind of run you through start to finish, foundations there, all the way through the present. All right, civilization comes to Japan a little bit later than it does to its neighbor, China. So we're going to get agriculture, we're going to get civilization, we're going to get sedentary societies, we're going to get city-states, and eventually a full-blown government. It's all going to happen later. So if you look at the timeline that we gave you, you don't have extensive agriculture until when? 200 CE. So a lot later than the River Valley civilizations that we were talking about in 2000 BCE. Now, one of the things that you're going to find with Japan is that because other civilizations have gotten started sooner, they're able to grow quicker by being able to learn from and copy their neighbors. So you see on the back side of your sheet, they actually have a national government 200 years after they develop extensive agriculture. That is lightning fast. I mean, when we talked about River Valley civilizations, it was like hundreds, if not 1,000 years between significant agriculture and central government. Here they've done it in a couple hundred. Why? What advantage do they have? What? They can cheat off of somebody else. They get to see all these other successful civilizations around. They don't have to come up with all these ideas for the first time on their own. All right, so we don't really care about Foundations era government in Japan. We're not being mean. They're just not doing anything first. What we do care about is when we get to the post-classical era, we care a lot about the Taika reforms. So somebody refresh my memory because I'm getting old. What happened in the Taika reforms? Just start talking. Well done. It's when they first wanted to be like the Chinese, and we call wanting to be like the Chinese sinification. Nice job, dude. So we'll throw that down here in cultural influences. Sinification. All right, so the Taika reforms do all kinds of fun things. From a government standpoint, what's the biggest thing it tries to do? All right, it tries to make Japan's monarch into a Chinese-style divine monarch. Up to and even including the Japanese king now using the title Son of Heaven. So this is like they just fired up the Xerox machine and put China on the Xerox and went beep. And they're trying to just crank out all this and take it back home. So we have a Chinese-style emperor in Japan. What else do we need to become like China? A bureaucracy. And what do we need to have an effective, functioning Chinese-style bureaucracy? Confucianism. Now, this all works great for about 100 years. Actually, it doesn't even work that great for 100 years. But after 100 years, there is so much dissatisfaction with this system. And there are so many different opinions now on what people would like to do that we're going to enter this period of significant political upheaval in Japan. Now, one last question for you. What was the vehicle that brought all of these other Chinese ideas to Japan and Korea and Vietnam? It was Buddhism. Nice job. It's like our own version of Jeopardy up here, and Steven's crushing it. All right, so as we get through the post-classical age, we're going to have this period of constant political conflict because we have all these different factions now. We have an emperor who thinks he should have total power, just like the Chinese emperor. We have all the aristocratic families, the very wealthy people that have been wealthy for generations. And because they've been wealthy for generations, they have gotten more and more of their extended family members into the government at some level, which gives them a lot of influence because there's always a cousin or an uncle or a nephew or a brother or somebody you can call up and be like, hey, I need a favor. And then next week, what do you know? They're calling you up for a favor. And so you have this family network within the government that gives you incredible power. So we have the emperor, we have the aristocrats. Now we have the bureaucrats, the Confucian-trained scholars, who aren't necessarily aristocrats, but just for the sake of confusion, sometimes they are. And then we have the Buddhists. And typically when we think of Buddhists, we think of these guys with shaved heads and orange robes that are very peaceful and quiet. No. You need to think of the Buddhists the same way that you think of like the medieval Catholic Church in Europe. Like these dudes are out there to conquer and gain power and get wealthy. Like popes used to ride into battle with armor and a, why can't I think? Mace, there we go. And like go fight people. So the Buddhists are actually wielding considerable power. They own a ton of land. They have a ton of money because they're not taxed. And if you have a lot of land and a lot of money, what do you control? People, and the peasants especially that are working on your land. So we got the emperor, we got the aristocrats, we got the bureaucrats, we got the Buddhists, and then we got all the people out in the countryside that own huge amounts of land. The provincial lords, essentially feudal nobles. We got 5 different groups fighting for power in Japan. Does anybody see this going well? No. Now, eventually what's going to happen, we're going to skip to the end for the sake of time. Who wins? The provincial lords. Because first everybody attacks the Buddhists because they're like, oh, they have too much power, they're not real Japanese. Shinto's our religion, they're outsiders, let's get rid of them. Everybody's like, yeah, so now we're down to 4. And they're like, yeah, we don't really like the aristocrats either, they suck. So now we're down to 3. And as long as we're attacking, Chinese things, let's attack the bureaucrats. And then let's set the emperor up as a puppet. Because he didn't really do anything anyway. He hangs out in his palace, he reads poetry, he thinks he's all deep. No. So we enter this period called the Bakufu, which is the period when the last group standing, the provincial warlords, are the ones left holding the power. And what advantage do they have over everybody else that gives them the ability to have this power? The samurai, an army. And so you could even say that the samurai become a cultural influence because it's through them. I mean, you can put them wherever you want. I don't really care. But it's almost like the Janissaries in the Ottoman Empire. You really are crushing it today, Stephen. Good job. Where this military force becomes kind of the backbone of society. And whatever the samurai wants, they get. And whatever the samurai don't want, shockingly, doesn't happen. It's weird. Now, what this is going to turn into, we're going to have a whole bunch of name changes, even though everything's going to stay mostly the same. During this period of the Bakufu, our provincial lords are known as Bushi. B-U-S-H-I. I love students. It's so cool. Like, you say something and then you spell it and everybody goes... Now, what's going to happen during this change is the Bushi are going to change their name for very complicated reasons that we don't have time for and become daimyo. D-A-I-M-Y-O. And so the idea of government is going to change. And we're going to go from the Bakufu to the shogunate. And our top, most powerful daimyo, whoever it happens to be at that time, will become the shogun. I know every year somebody thinks that a shogun is somebody who has a gun, and that's why he's the most powerful, and that's why they call him shogun. That's not right. Shogun and gun have zero connection with each other. It's not shotgun. It's not the Japanese version of shotgun. It has nothing to do with firearms. How many people did I just help? Okay. This is going to carry us through all the way to 1853. That's a long, long time. And essentially during that period, Japan is, for all intents and purposes, a feudal system. A series of regional warlords, each one competing for the loyalty of the others and supremacy over the others, each one striving to become the strongest and therefore able to dominate most of the country. It's like a throwback to medieval Europe. Right. Right.
It's not powerful. Sort of, like today's Queen Elizabeth, yes.
Right.
But who has power? Who has power? And specifically the guy with the gun. Shogun.
Wait, I thought the shogun was the
The shogun is the leader. They still have an emperor. The emperor's going to chill in the palace. He's going to try really, really hard not to say or do anything that makes anybody else mad, because otherwise they might just get rid of him and put in a new guy. So the emperor is there to lend stability, to let the people think, oh look, there's the emperor, all is well. And especially, what's the dominant religion in Japan? Shinto. And in the Shinto faith, the emperor serves a very, very important role. Anybody? What's that? A connection to heaven. In some cases, I've even heard God on earth, or at the very least, Son of God. So some sort of deity incarnate in man on the ground. Again, for the Japanese people, that now lends a sense of stability. All is right as long as there is an emperor. But who's really in charge? Shogun. And we're going to run through a period, or several periods, of shogunates. Almost like dynasties in China, where a particularly powerful family rises to power and is able to secure the loyalty and or obedience of most of the other daimyo and effectively rule most of Japan. Again, with the emperor still sitting there chilling in his palace. They're briefly going to allow Europeans to show up once Europeans come out of their caves and find boats and water and start sailing around. But after a brief exposure to Europeans, how do the Japanese and most other cultures in Asia react? All right, isolation. They don't like them because these pesky Europeans keep bringing something with them and insisting that they share. And that is Christianity. And the Japanese in particular decide, we don't like this. We thought you were cool when you were bringing us fun stuff like clocks and tobacco and then firearms. Again, still not shogun gun. But then you keep bringing your missionaries and they're really starting to tick us off because we already have Shinto and we have Buddhism and now we have Christianity and it's just not working for us. And you have a very extreme example where I think it's Ieyasu, makes a very public declaration against the Christian missionaries, and he has 20 some odd Christian Jesuit missionaries crucified on the beach at Nagasaki. And it's pretty much right after that that Japan establishes its isolationist policies. Yeah. So again, this is going to last all the way up through 1853 when another white guy in a boat shows up. Matthew Perry. Not the guy from Friends. Never really expect a laugh. I mean, I wait for the groan now. But yeah. Thanks, Michael. All right, so 1853, Matthew Perry shows up with a small American fleet of battleships with a letter from President Fillmore, who you'll probably never learn even in U.S. history, asking to open trade with the Japanese and making the not-so-veiled threat that if you say no, we will force you to trade with us using all these awesome battleships parked in your harbor. So the Japanese are now forcibly open to trade, much like their neighbor China was after the Opium War. Unlike China, who tries to fight back and gets wrecked, what does Japan do? All right. They allow the United States and later other European nations to come in and engage in trade. And during that time, what we call the Meiji era, what begins to happen in Japan? Industrialization and, starts with a W, Westernization. See, you guys know your stuff, just say it. All right, so they model themselves after all the best things that they see in the West. They send out ambassadors, they send out samurai as diplomats to go and learn from all these other European nations. They bring back the best ideas they can find. They kind of put them together in a European hodgepodge, and they change. They fundamentally alter so many aspects of traditional Japanese culture in the pursuit of regaining their independence and their strength. What that is going to lead to then is a period of imperialism. where the Japanese will take a page right out of the European playbook and will begin to exert their own military dominance over the surrounding areas. So you're going to have things like the Sino-Japanese War, where Japan and China duke it out over Korea. You're going to then have the Russo-Japanese War, where Russia and Japan duke it out over Manchuria. And in both cases, Japan wins fairly easily. And from there, during consecutive world wars, Japan will steadily increase its territorial holdings, following this model of imperialism that they learned from the Europeans. And that's going to last all the way up until the end of World War II. And with Japan's surrender, you're going to see once again some significant changes take place in Japan's government. Because under the very, very watchful eye of Douglas MacArthur in the United States, Japan is going to adopt a new constitution, a multi-party democracy. What's that? Mm-hmm. And they will try to ensure that the Japanese parliament, called the, and I honestly don't know, is it Diet or Diet?
I think it's Diet.
Okay.
And it's Diet in Germany as well.
Okay. We'll go with that then. They try to ensure that the Japanese parliament, the Diet, is the dominant political influence. The emperor is forced to step down at the end of World War II. Did they try to bring him back for a while as a figurehead?
Well, he was still a figurehead during World War II.
Right.
Just like from earlier, Hirohito is the emperor, but he has absolutely no say whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
It's still the military commanders. They're not shoguns anymore, but they're still in power. And I kind of think they did try to bring him back for a little while as a figurehead, but
Right.
with the new constitution, you're not going to have. The emperor hasn't had power for years.
Right.
Can I point out
Mhm.
that with the forceful opening, Japan, instead of like China where they resisted and you've got the war, and then they're forced to do stuff that they might not want to do, Japan is sort of an example of if you can't beat them, join them. And then they were able to control to an extent what they did. And then once they realized that, hey, this isn't bad, this industrialization is pretty good, this colonization, this imperialism is pretty good, we're getting power, then they were able to step right up to the power. Where China had to struggle, didn't they, with all of that. Part of it's because half the country was high, but, it's also because when you lose a battle, when you lose a war, you've lost. It's done. Somebody else gets to tell you what to do. And Japan was smart in, all right, come in, but we can have some say.
And then also remember that one of the things that allows them to embrace that power so much more quickly is they get rid of the samurai as a significant cultural influence. Because the samurai, just like Stephen pointed out earlier with the Janissaries in the Ottoman Empire and the bureaucrats in China, those are your traditionalists. Those are the people that always want things to stay the same because they're the ones that benefit from the way that things are. And so as part of this Meiji era, the samurai and the provincial warlords, the daimyo, the shogun, they all gotta go. If Japan is going to westernize and industrialize and compete with the West in the modern world, those traditional influences in their society have to be more or less suppressed. And Japan is able to do that effectively where others are not. Stephen?
If the emperor didn't have power, who started a Japanese form of fascism? Was the military?
Mm-hmm.
The military commanders during World War II are going to be complete evil. As I've said, the people of Japan, and part of this is a cultural thing, but the people of Japan had not heard the emperor's voice until he announced over the radio that Japan was surrendering. That's the first time they'd even heard his voice of it is he was supposed to be, you know, this amazing magical thing, and you're not supposed to hear his voice. But part of it is because he had nothing to say to them. He sat in his palace and wrote poetry. But part of it is a culture, because even though they got rid of those more classical traditionalists, they still have it's still an ingrained nature to have this strong military leader, and it's never been the emperor. For at least hundreds of years, it's not been the emperor. So.
All right, so we more or less good with government now? Any residual issues or questions people have? Okay, economy is going to be fairly quick. And there really isn't a whole lot to elaborate on based on what you have on your sheet. Foundations era, there isn't a lot there except for some exchange with the Chinese mainland. In the post-classical age, you're going to continue with that exchange with China until China weakens. And when China weakens, you're going to see less trade with them and Japan focusing more on their internal development. That's when you have all the fighting between the emperor and the Buddhists and the aristocrats and the bureaucrats and the provincial warlords. And at that point, external trade kind of falls down a little bit. Now, once all that gets stabilized under first the Bakufu and then the shogunate, then you're going to see a transition to a little bit of engagement with the West when the Europeans first show up, late 1500s, early 1600s. And then what did we say happened not too long after the Europeans showed up? They stay best friends forever? What does Japan do economically and politically not long after the Europeans show up? Isolation. That is an economic policy as well. If you pursue isolationism, you really can't engage in much trade except within your country. Now, for some reason, they do still allow the Portuguese to show up a little bit. Japan and Portugal have this weird connection. I don't entirely understand it. I don't know that they entirely understand it. But for some reason, there was a more reciprocal relationship there. And you even see it cross over a little bit linguistically. Like in Portuguese, thank you is obrigado. And in Japanese, it's arigato. Like there's some weird, distinct similarities between the two languages that, I don't know, it demonstrates how long-lived that relationship is, even as the Japanese cut out everybody else. Anyway, so that isolationism is going to last all the way up until 1853, Matthew Perry. Matthew Perry shows up, Japan goes, oh crap, well, we're not going to fight, we're going to learn. And you see westernization and industrialization. That becomes the focus of their economy. We need to build up, and we need to now engage in trade and exchange with the West so that we can get much more smarter. Seeing if you're paying attention. Okay. As Japan becomes an imperial power, they will now control trade in East Asia because they're going to gain control of Korea, Manchuria, mainland China, and then all of those island nations in the Pacific. After World War II, you have this period of rapid rebuilding and reindustrialization because you have to recover from the damages of war. The United States helps with this. And that brings you to Japan today, which is a phenomenally successful economic nation. It's one of the top economies in the world, year after year after year. Almost always in the top 3 or 4, depending on how the United States and China and Japan, and there's usually somebody else in that mix, but I mean, they're perennial top 3 economies. And you see what Japan is able to focus on. Cutting edge technology in computers and robotics and lasers and all that fun stuff. I mean, they brought you Nintendo in the early 1980s, and teenagers for decades have been thankful. What's that? What?
Sony.
Sony? Yeah. Sony too. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of Japan. I'm not trying to like pick one thing and saying nothing else matters. I'm just saying Nintendo was kind of a big deal. All right, so that takes you all the way through economy. You also wanted to talk about cultural influences, right? Which is always a little bit similar to foreign contacts. So we've got the Taika reforms and sinification, which means that the Chinese are a significant influence. You also have the near miss in the post-classical age of the Mongol invasion. Not that that had a significant cultural impact, but it definitely helped to cement the Shinto faith, because they believed that the tsunami that came and wiped out the Mongol fleet was a kamikaze. Kami being the Shinto spirits, and kazi being wind. So kamikaze being divine wind that protected their country from the Mongol invaders. Anybody find that term to be familiar? Right. You're going to see that crop up again in World War II, with that same mentality of protecting their homeland through this divine wind, except now it's 20th century airplane technology rather than a tsunami, but the idea still holds true. All right, as you transition into the early modern, you have interaction with the West. So you have the Portuguese, the Dutch, the British that all show up and attempt to influence Japan culturally, economically, politically. And before too long, Japan's response is, for the third time, isolationism. So, since they're isolated, do you have much in the way of foreign contacts or cultural influences for a while? No. And so your biggest cultural influence then remains the samurai for a large chunk of the early modern and modern era, until who shows up? Matthew Perry, which means your next big foreign contact or cultural influence is the United States. And the Japanese are impacted by European imperialism. And so first it's European imperialism that has a huge impact on culture, and then it later is Japanese imperialism as they're able to turn the tables and begin to create their own overseas empire. And at that point, that's going to bring them back into contact with China during the Sino-Japanese War and with Russia during the Russo-Japanese War. Not so much as a cultural influence, but more as an opportunity for Japan to demonstrate its own cultural superiority. And then as you get to the present era, who's going to have the largest impact culturally? The United States, both during and then immediately after World War II, as both then conqueror and rebuilder in helping the Japanese get their feet back under them economically and politically. That makes for an easy transition to religions. So early on, Shinto shows up as the original Japanese faith. It's later influenced by Buddhism and then also Confucianism. And then from the early modern period on, we're going to see Christianity become another viable religion in Japan. Not always popular, certainly not always supported by the government. Certainly there are entire generations or centuries where Christians are persecuted in Japan, but it does become a steadily growing faith within Japanese society. One last thing to mention, and it's on your sheet, Shinto will largely cease to exist following World War II, not only with the removal of the emperor, but also with the destruction of a significant number of Shinto temples as a result of the Allied bombing. All right, what else you want? We got a few minutes left. Your choice. Status of merchants, okay. You'll notice there isn't a whole lot on their sheet. As you adopt Confucian teachings, what would you expect to happen to the status of Japanese merchants? All right, you would expect the status to go down, that's women, as a result of Confucianism here. As long as Confucianism is a viable option. And as long as Japan is trying to emulate China, you would expect that to continue. Now, you're going to see a similar thing happen during the period of isolationism, right? Because if you're isolated, what need do you have of merchants? Very little, if any. And so through a large stretch of this time period, you're going to see a relatively low value placed on Japanese merchants. That will all change significantly from this point forward, when Japan will become a fierce global trading partner with many, many other nations as they industrialize and westernize. I realize we're not giving you much in the way of specifics, but hopefully that general trend helps. Do we need to talk about women? No? Yes? Sideways shake of the head? Yes, ma'am. Yes, please. Okay. All right. So, do we ever really need to touch on the fact that a society is patriarchal? No, because pretty much all of them are. So we want to focus on the things that are unique to each culture. Early on, we get to talk about female samurai. What does that tell us? All right, they have influence in society. They're trusted to act like men. If they are given weapons training and allowed to ride on horses and go hunting, and in some cases even ride into combat, that shows a society that is comfortable with women in a way that many societies are not. Guess when that all goes downhill? Right, Confucianism and the Taika reforms. So because of the Taika reforms, you're going to see women's status decline. However, probably not to the degree that you do in China itself. I honestly haven't heard that the Japanese adopt foot binding. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen, because I am by no means all-knowing. But women's roles will still be significantly reduced. Women will stop being samurai. You're going to get a very traditionalist view of women that develops over time. And so even then, when you get to westernization, and by this time women in the West are being given greater and greater economic and social opportunities, by that point, traditional Japanese culture says, no, that's too much. We're not ready for that yet. We still have a very traditional role of our women, not traditional here with the Taika, with the female samurai, but traditional here with more of the Chinese view. After World War II, like many Western nations, Japanese women gain suffrage, the right to vote and participate in their governments. Anything else quickly? And again, if you need to go, you're allowed to go. Does anybody have any other questions or topics they want covered? All right. Thank you guys for coming. Tomorrow is Abbasids. Awesome.